Thank you very much. Hello everyone, thanks for coming along. Again, I'm going to go more down the practical side rather than anything involved in kind of numbers. It's not really my specialty, so hope all goes well there. So I work for Jersey Reds, which is a rugby club in the Championship, and we use StatSports GPS software along with Power BI to kind of display our data. So today's talk is on providing performance solutions using GPS. I'll talk a little bit more in the next slide why it's called that. So the constraints of Jersey Reds, three main ones. We have a small squad. We have a game plan that requires us to play fast, apply a lot of pressure to the opposition, and for our players to be very fit. And we have few staff. We have two S&Cs. We have two physiotherapists and two rugby coaches with a director of rugby, so it can be pretty hectic. So our performance priorities are to support availability, to make sure that we have as many people as possible training and playing, to have fast and fit players to support our game plan. And then that kind of leads into what the system needs to be. It needs to have fast, concise reporting. So say, for example, if we have a training day on a Tuesday, if it takes 4 or 5 hours for the report to go out, we've missed the opportunity to sit down as a team and have a discussion around it. So it needs to go out fairly sharpish, which feeds into StatSports and how quick the download speed is. Quick little plug there. Thanks very much, guys. And then the Power BI system that goes in the background to be able to click a button, have it all refreshed straight away and send it out. Additionally, what was kind of a frustration in the past was if we wanted information, having to fire around WhatsApp messages and ask questions didn't really work out that well. So Power BI allows us to have all the information available remotely, so anyone in our coaching team can log on, have a look and get what information they need straight away. Bespoke solutions kind of ties in with what the title of the presentation is. So with such a tight staff group, so essentially my role would be head of rehab, S&C, assistant to the head of performance for the main squad, and then also sports science, kind of nutrition support as well. So if I can in any way avoid spending 5-6 hours a day on GPS, I will, just because there's so much else to tick off. So everything has to be bespoke to an actual problem we have in our performance team. It's not something that I'm going to spend 3-4 hours a day additional on in terms of setting up the system. So going through each department, and I suppose their priority areas for what they need to know. The rugby coaches, sitting down with each of these departments and asking questions, came up with, they wanted to know, are the players physically prepared to execute the game plan? Which rugby drills have the highest running demands to help them plan? And who is working hardest in conditioning focused drills so they can tell people off or congratulate them? So point number one, are the players physically prepared to execute the game plan? There was a paper by Mr. Delaney who came out with peak running intensities of international rugby players across different time frames. So say, for example, in a minute, what was the peak intensity that outside backs, half backs, etc. covered versus 5 minutes? And it kind of makes sense that as the time period gets longer, people can't maintain the same intensity. So we have this displayed in our office, and it acts as a reference point that if our goal and objective is to play fast rugby, this is, I suppose, our definition of fast rugby, and what does that actually look like in terms of statistics. So we will oftentimes refer back to these whenever we are displaying drills and meters per minute. This is what we are going to frame that with. So which rugby drills have the highest running demands? The beauty of Power BI is all of the data that has been downloaded from StatSports all year is all available on the system. So by creating a little matrix with the headings above, it pretty much gives you every single drill we've had all year and what the meters per minute is in those. So if the objective in training is to practice some fast rugby, we can see which drills kind of provide the constraints for fast rugby, and that helps them to plan. Who's working hardest in conditioning focused drills? Again, a nice simple one. Whenever we code the drills individually, we can just rank people. rank the squad by metres per minute and get a nice leaderboard. The lads can get quite competitive with it as well, so it helps us to drive training intensity from the physical side of things. Ahead of performance, our players being consistently exposed to intense periods or speed efforts, so kind of tying in with what Lawrence was talking around there, around risk mitigation. Our loads being increased gradually over pre-season, same sort of thing, and our session plans in line with intensity volume targets. There we go. So, are they being exposed to intense periods and speed efforts? So going back to that graph from the research paper before, if we have a 5-minute block of training, is that 5-minute block performed at a high intensity or not? This can be used by the head of performance to feed back into the rugby coaches. If they have stood kind of chatting for a few minutes in the drill, we'll drop the intensity right down, and then that no longer provides us with the intensity that we need to make sure they're physically prepared for match play. So it has resulted in some pretty good conversations in the office where if we want to encourage fast play, what can the rugby coaches do in that moment to do that? So it might be if the ball goes out of play, they chuck one straight back in and we keep going. So this exposure, the head of performance can get an indication of over the week and on a particular day, how much time are we spending at or above game intensity, which can then be periodised. The speed efforts, again, pulling things into a matrix. He can go on to this system at any time, wherever he is, choose what week he wants to see, which would usually be the current week. And then with some conditional formatting, it will say what percentage of max speed each individual has hit that week. So if someone is, I think for the forwards, the threshold is below 85%. For the backs, it's below 90%. That's a little flag that gets raised in and around that person not having a speed exposure. So that would be a question of, do they then need to go and get a speed exposure that week, or how can we avoid them going multiple weeks without getting this? And what that gives us confidence in is that they can go into a match and be ready for these high speed efforts. Our loads being gradually increased over pre-season. So for each of our pre-season training sessions, I will send out one of these, which our head of performance outlines what he would like the target total distance and high speed running to be for a session. And then with some simple kind of conditional formatting, I'll outline whether lads were above, below, on point, which could then result in kind of discussions around people getting top-ups or people getting better acute management. If someone goes way over, do they come in the next morning and pull back in their gym load a little bit? Do they get some massage before they go into the gym? All those kind of things. There we go. Our session plans in line with intensity or volume targets. So the head of performance will outline how he wants that week or phase to be periodised, and will outline intensity volume targets for each session. The coaches will have their priorities in terms of what they want from a tactical perspective, and it's important that the conversations can happen to try and marry those up and tie them together. So the coaches will put together a session plan with drill names and how long they want to do each one for. So if we had outlined that we wanted the session to be 4.5 to 5K, what our head of performance can do is use an Excel sheet that I've set up with some VLOOKUPs, choose what the drill is, input how long they want to do it for, and it will, for forwards and backs, give him a rough indication of how much distance they're going to cover in that session. So if it comes out 2K over, we can then have discussions ahead of time to say, can we pull a few minutes out of here? Additionally, the metres per minute, if the metres per minute is really, really low and we want that session to be fast, can we swap out a drill that is more contact based for something that is more running based? In general, it is the head of performance fighting to have stuff taken out of the session, but the rugby coaches in our club are brilliant and very receptive to this type of thing. And then in a rehab setting, are the players prepped for acute training and game intensity and volume? Are they prepped for the weekly training and game volumes? And are we on target during the actual running sessions? So similar to what Lawrence was talking around, we can identify what is the biggest thing that they have to do whenever they come back, usually as a game, but also what are the biggest exposures they'll get in training sessions. So in terms of intensity and volume, we know with those figures what it is that they have to be prepared for. So that gives us our endpoint to then work back from whenever we're doing our rehab plan. Are the players prepped for weekly training game volumes? So the same sort of thing, just on a weekly view as opposed to a daily view. Set that as our target, 80%, 90%, whatever it is we end up agreeing on, and work backwards from there. And it has also been quite insightful, I suppose, taking it back a little bit of a broader view. All of these things have been created through necessity. They've been created through discussions and things that we have identified that we need. We had a case earlier on in the year where a player re-injured during rehab, which was on me in the sense that not coming from a rugby background and not looking closely enough at the stats, didn't fully appreciate how much distance they actually covered, low intensity. So was probably trying to over-condition him for him to come back. So these type of things, which are all in Power BI, there's loads of different types of graph you can use, provide a nice visual where we can get an indication, say for example, if that is his total distance, how much of that is actually over 2.2, 50%. So if 50% of his total distance is less than 2.2 meters per second, gives you a better understanding of the demands of their position and the game, which then improves our rehab session planning. Our players on target during return to rugby and rehab sessions. So this is where the live system comes in. So using an Apple Watch and the iPads, whether it's myself leading it or one of the physios or the other S&C. If this is like an example rehab run plan, and at the bottom we'll outline what we want their total distance to be, high-speed running, and whether there's a speed limit or a speed target, whatever it is. It just reduces uncertainty around what it is they're actually doing in that session, so we can be pretty confident that they're bang on what we want them to hit. Taking that into a team view, I'm sure some of you saw in the demo out there, you can outline kind of thresholds, whether it's intensity thresholds or volume thresholds, for where you want guys to be at during the session. And those are extremely helpful for just getting a quick view of who's kind of pushing it, who's lagging a little bit behind. For our system, in my opinion, areas for development with a small kind of staffing group, there are quite a few occasions when the iPad is taken out and it just ends up sitting there. So then we lose the live coding that could have happened that day, which then makes the back-end analysis a lot more difficult. So I suppose being more consistent with the coding of our live during training would allow us better analysis of what actually happens when the ball is in play and what happens whenever drills are happening. Integrate with rugby analysis video and codes. Ruth has shown me how to do this, which I haven't managed to do yet. The sports code system that we use, you can tie the two together. Say look at what was the most intense period of play for a player during a game, and look at that on the video on the side as well. So doing things like that with rugby analysis, breaking it down into kind of our game components. So what way are we working whenever we're defending, whenever we're attacking, whenever we're going through phases, when we're on our kick chase, just to give a little bit more context to it and break it down into specific situations, as opposed to you covered 7K, which could be a big thumb up or thumb down. And a lot of lads don't really get that. Whereas if you tie it to, on this kick chase, you covered this speed. Kick chases in general, you worked harder than anyone else. It kind of gives some more specific and better feedback. And integrate physical prep principles, heuristics and safety nets. So to go back to the speed exposure example, because we're looking at different pieces of data, human error, there is the capacity for us to miss things. So integrating those into the system with some conditional formatting or rules, to me, would be quite helpful. So say, for example, setting it up that if someone goes multiple weeks without a speed exposure, it then flags. Things like that, just as a safety net, would be very helpful, in my opinion. That is pretty much me. Oops, I'll go back. Thanks to Ruth, who has helped me tremendously in terms of setting up the system. James Whitfield is sports scientist at Leicester Tigers, who showed me how to set up Power BI. Without him, I'd have been trawling through YouTube tutorials for hours and hours on end. And then Sam, Darren and Ollie are the other members of our performance team currently. Their questions and feedback has been very, very helpful in terms of showing me the direction that we need to go. And Jim Maloney was my boss previously, who has given me a lot of time in terms of helping me with my understanding of GPS. That's me. Thank you.